My name is Joe Peroni, and this is the Rise Above Project. And today we're going to talk about a very interesting subject. It's a concept called the hedgehog dilemma. Now, if you don't like the word hedgehog, we can also call it the porcupine dilemma. This concept was brought about by a person named Arthur Schopenhauer. He was a philosopher. We'll talk about him a little bit more later, but just so you know now, he's a very pessimistic guy. Now, with his work, Sigmund Freud, who I think everybody knows, took over, and he also spoke about this at length. As a matter of fact, he was known for having a metal porcupine on his desk, and with his clients, he would use that to be able to show certain stories. Now, here's one of them. Now, I don't have a hedgehog, I don't have porcupines, but I've got a brush. So he would talk about porcupines in terms of, you get all of these spines or quills, and how difficult it would be for another porcupine or a hedgehog to be able to get close to another one. And so this would describe or be a metaphor of how difficult it is to get close to somebody and have intimacy, whether it's emotional or whether it's to have sex. How do porcupines do this? Because if you do not do it exactly right and care about your partner, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So Freud would use that as an example, and I think it's a really good example, actually. So the hedgehog dilemma, what it really does is it tries to describe the challenges of intimacy. And that's the first part. So let's talk about the story of the hedgehogs. So let's say we have a bunch of hedgehogs and it's a very cold winter night. What happens here is obviously they start to freeze. Now, what will a bunch of hedgehogs do in order to create warmth? What they do is they start to move together. And what happens is every time they move a little bit closer, it feels better because they get warm. And then they want to feel really good, so they huddle all up and they get really close together. But then the inevitable happens. One of them stabs the other one and injects the quills. And somebody gets hurt, a bunch of them get hurt, and what they do is they immediately separate as far as possible. But then what happens? They get cold. So then what happens is they're freezing, they're shivering, so they start to try and go, okay, well, maybe we can make this work. And they come back together. And of course, the inevitable happens. They stab each other. So this goes on all night. And what happens is it actually goes on forever. And if we take it and use this metaphor for people, I think this is true all the time with people as well, is that we're always trying to fight for the perfect space between what is too close and what's too far. Because if we tend to get too close to people, there's a potential for a lot of emotional hurt. So this goes back and forth forever. Now, so what's the lesson here? What would Schopenhauer say? Well, his lesson would be, is keep your distance from people, right? And we have to be okay with a certain amount of isolation, and you have to be okay with withdrawing from people and sometimes society. Because no matter what, no matter how well-meaning people are, no matter how much they want to care, what happens is that they inevitably end up hurting their partners anyway. So he would say, keep your distance. Now that's one way to look at it. But again, Schopenhauer was a pessimist. We don't have to go by that. What we can do is look for other ways where we can improve upon this. So what can be learned from an optimistic view? Well, here's two things that I thought of. Number one, can we improve our behaviors and manage our emotions enough to become less prickly ourselves, right? So we can take charge. The other part of it is that can we improve our abilities to become more tolerant of other people? And we can do this in a positive way. Now, I don't mean that we have to become tolerant of prickly people to the point of getting ourselves abused. I don't mean that. But I do mean that if you go through life without having any ability to realize that people are not perfect and you have no ability to forgive people, you're probably never going to get any degree of intimacy. And I know this day and age, the big word that people like to use is boundaries. But I think we're overusing it. I think we're confusing the word boundary with impenetrable walls. Because what I see is there's a lot of people building boundaries to people that have a different point of view than them. You know, people that act a little bit different, people who have a little bit of a different lifestyle than them. And so I think what we're doing now is we're immediately saying, well, if I don't agree with this person, I'm just going to build up a boundary because I don't need to be around that kind of negativity. And I think what they're doing is they actually have a lot of emotional immaturity. Then they read a little bit of something on somebody's blog, and then they think, oh, boundaries, that's good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up boundaries instead of actually increasing my emotional intelligence. Just something I see all the time. So let's take a look at this in a more positive fashion. Let's take the same story of hedgehogs, but let's give the hedgehog a name. So let's call him Henry. So we're going to talk about Henry the hedgehog. Now, Henry wants a friend. Let's say this is Henry. Henry wants a friend more than anything else in this world. He's affectionate, he's caring, he's loving. He wants to share his happiness with somebody else. And he likes to hug his friends. Unfortunately, nobody wants to be hugged by Henry. Why? Because he stabs them when he hugs them because he has quills. So it's Henry's birthday. So on Henry's birthday, he has a wish. And of course, he's by himself because he has no friends. But he has a wish, and his wish is to have a best friend that can accept him for who he is. Again, he has no friends. So what happens is, in this magic, there's a bunch of balloon animals that jump up and start to play with them. And they dance and they fly around, and Henry's having a great time. And all these balloons are his friends now, these little balloon animals. But you know what happens, right? Of course, the inevitable. He hugs one of them, and it's a balloon. So he kills him. The balloon pops. So all the other balloons are afraid of him now. Of course, this is how he loses all his friends, because he's too prickly. So what happens is that all the balloons are trying to get out of the house, and Henry understands this because he's a good and caring hedgehog. So he opens up the door and he lets the balloons leave. And he sits there by himself and cries. A few minutes later, there's a knock at the door, and who shows up but all those balloons that ran away from him. And they realize that it's not that they dislike him or hate him, it's just that they can't provide the intimacy that Henry needs. So they bring him back a turtle. And of course, what do you think happens? So he still has some leftover birthday cake because there was really nobody there to share it with him. So Henry gives him part of his birthday cake. The turtle eats it, and then they hug. And guess what? The turtle has a hard shell. And so it works. And they can share intimacy, and nobody gets hurt. And so he ends up finally finding his best friend in a turtle. So now we have another way to deal with it, right? In other words, maybe the moral of the story is that no matter how prickly you are, you're still deserving of having friendship or some type of intimacy. Now, going back to, maybe you're the one that's a little too prickly. We can improve on that. I'll give you an example of when I was a kid. When I was a kid, we're talking, I remember the movie theater with some friends, probably about 11 years old. I saw the first Rocky movie, and I was all about it. I think I saw 2 or 3 of them. We just stayed in the theater to rewatch it. And in between the movies, me and my friend were having slap fights. We were so into it, we just wanted to box each other. But I went home that day, and I put in my notebook that my new schedule, and I was going to do a certain amount of push-ups and sit-ups every day, and I was going to run every day, and I told my mother I wanted eggs because I wanted to eat the raw eggs just like Sylvester Stallone did. I was all about Sylvester Stallone. He was like my favorite guy in the world. But again, I was 11. As I started to get older and I started to do bodybuilding, and I was in bodybuilding shows, sometimes I did really well and I won, and sometimes I didn't do so well. You know, things go like that. But at some point in my life, I started to get down on myself because I felt like I was poor. I didn't have enough money, and I felt like I was not living up to my potential. And then I would see a movie or see a picture, and Sylvester Stallone would be there, and a girl would be like, oh my God, he looks so great. Meanwhile, I'm looking at the pictures of me from a bodybuilding show going, I could beat him in a bodybuilding show, but nobody knows me because I'm just a nobody, poor kid. And so I started to feel like a victim, and I started to get down on myself, and I had low self-esteem. So I became really prickly. And you know when somebody's prickly when they start to try to invalidate people around them, right? So you can put yourself down. You can be critical of yourself, but you don't want to say that out loud. So because I was critical of myself inside, I didn't say that out loud. I was critical of everything around me. And I think my lowest moment is that I was at this minimum wage job, and I came home for lunch, and I turned on the TV. And one of my friends, who was a Sylvester Stallone lookalike, and again, he's my friend. I like him. There's nothing wrong with him at all. It was all me and my insecurity. I was watching him on TV, and at the time it was like a big show. It was like one of those Oprah shows or Phil Donahue, one of those. And he's on there, and he looked exactly like Sylvester Stallone. But like I said, I was like, hold it. He's getting paid and he's getting famous to look at a level 7 when I'm trying to compete at a bodybuilding level at like a 10. And it just made me feel even worse that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, I was going nowhere. And so I stopped watching Sylvester Stallone movies. I stopped watching Arnold movies or Jean-Claude. Why? Straight jealousy. And if you were with me around then and people would talk to me, they would be like, what's wrong with that guy? He's always angry. He doesn't have a good thing to say about anybody. And again, that's, if you want to solve that problem, you have to be able to start loving yourself. And you have to start getting into your own power and to start taking your power back. And if you think you're worth something, you have to keep pushing towards it and not worry if somebody is making more money than you or more famous. You just have to do your thing. Now, I'm saying this now as a 56-year-old man, but when I was anywhere between, say, 15 and, say, 21 years old, it was a very immature time for me. So again, it would be very hard to be very close to a person like that who is very negative. So you have to improve that upon yourself. And once you improve yourself and your self-esteem, the world starts to look different. Now I like everybody, and it's really hard for me to say something negative about everybody because I'm happy where I am, and I'm happy with what I've been doing and how I've tried to run my life. So again, that's another way you can take matters into your own hands to become a little bit less prickly. Another way to think about this story with Henry is that we always have the ability to find people who are compatible with our level of intimacy that we desire. Again, not everybody's going to be capable of giving us the level of intimacy that we need. There are some people that don't need a lot of intimacy, and they have no desire to improve on that. They like it just the way it is. And so they have to find somebody who's willing to be distant with them, and that'll probably work just fine. But I think overall, I think most people struggle with this of intimacy, non-intimacy, how close, or be willing to put yourself out there to get hurt. I think it's a very worldwide type of thing. I think all living things look for the perfect balance of being separate and yet together, but do it simultaneously, which is really difficult. Or to be an individual, or to be part of a collective, or part of a group, or part of a family even. And yet you need to do that simultaneously. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. So I think one of the goals of life is to find the perfect continuum between love and freedom. Some people don't look at it like that, but let's take a look. Because a lot of times, in order to love somebody, they want to possess you. They want to cage you. They want to make it to where you can't ever talk to anybody, see anybody, be around anybody. And if they're not good with their insides, they don't want to see you do well. They don't want you to be successful. Do I know this from a clinical perspective? Yes. Do I know it from empirical evidence? Yes. Do I know it from personal experience, anecdotal experience? Yes, because I just told you part of my story. That's why I put that in there. So love versus freedom. Love without freedom can be and is probably claustrophobic. It induces resentment. It can be abusive even if the love that you're trying to receive from somebody ends up that you have to give up your freedom. It inhibits your free expression. It can inhibit your life. It's like trying to love a flower, but picking the flower out of your garden, and putting it in your kitchen. You actually killed it. You didn't love the flower, you killed the flower, right? If you love the flower, you would continue to water it and let it get sun, right? And be in the garden so it can grow, but you didn't do that, you killed it. So what's the opposite of all this? Freedom without love, right? That's on the other side, the flip side. Again, the exact opposite. Now, freedom without love, it can be really superficial and can be really lonely. Again, hedgehogs, way out here, superficial and lonely. You get together and you start to develop a little more intimacy, but you could get hurt. And that's where the dilemma is. So I think the key here is to create a fulfilling relationship where both partners feel loved, supported, and have room to grow, and, like we just said, and to have freedom. Love should include freedom. But how do we do this? This is really hard. I told you what I tried to do before, is that when I felt good and my self-esteem went up, I was able to have better relationships. But overall, for everybody else listening, this is just a thought. I think both partners need to be mature. They need to be secure in themselves. They need to love themselves. They need to not just love it, like who they are generally. And they could forgive themselves for messing up here and there. And they need to be responsible for improving their own weaknesses. Don't put it on your partner to change you. Or if you are an angry person, a frustrated person, a person that has low self-esteem, a person who just has had so many negative things happen to you that you don't really like yourself anymore. These types of things, don't expect your partner to come running and fix those. These are things you have to fix for yourself. And the better you feel about yourself and the more you feel like you're a person of value, the more you're going to put yourself in a position where other people value you. And then I believe that if you're this hedgehog or porcupine, then we can get closer and closer and closer and closer. And we can have real intimacy. But I don't think you can have real intimacy unless you're okay with who you are yourself. And with all due respect to Arthur Schopenhauer, who is more famous as a philosopher than I'll ever be, I do not agree with him that the best way to deal with this is just to keep your distance from people because all people will disappoint you. I don't believe that. And if people do disappoint you, then expect that as just being a part of being human because you disappoint people too and you're not perfect. And there's a time to forgive as well. I hope this show is valuable to you. My name is Joe Prony. This is the Rise Above Project. I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe. And if you wanted to know more about the hedgehog dilemma, I'm sure you can Google that or look it up yourself or ask me some more questions and I'll come up with some more stuff for you. Thank you for listening.